Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 12 work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, where we have the pleasure of learning about a new approach to economic development from Mr. Fournier and Mr. Dohoney. Mr. Dohoney, you have the con.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, members of council. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to come back and speak with you. My role tonight will be the budget work session, so you'll be hearing from some of the staff regarding the budget. April 15th, at the beginning of the council meeting, is when I will be presenting next year's budget to you. In May, we will skip because we devote all of our attention during May to the passage of the budget, number of sessions related to that. And then in June, we'll come back for a work session focusing on the trunk line study that you asked us to do some months ago. The study has been completed. You may hear something about it because it's going to be discussed within the Transportation Commission before it comes here.
Mr. Dohoney, well, ma'am, could you please keep your sign out of the walkway? Thank you, Mr. Dohoney.
So the Transportation Commission will discuss it first. It'll probably get into the public realm before it comes here. Staff will come and walk you through what we have done, what the options might be, and what some of the steps. We won't go past June. We'll figure that out when we get a little further on summer breaks, et cetera. But that's what the coming attractions are like. And Mr. Fournier will come up and walk through his presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, members of council. Glad to be joining you once again to talk about a new approach to economic development in the city of Ann Arbor. Let me just start with a couple housekeeping notes, which is that I know we have met about this before. We met to speak about this at the December City Council planning session. I've had an opportunity to speak with individual members of council. So what I'm going to do is, since this is the first televised meeting where we're discussing this report, I'm going to give what I'll call a Reader's Digest version of some of the main tenets of the report. Most of which you've already heard, but probably bears some repeating for the benefit of the public, and then talk about key recommendations and a couple emerging issues, and then we'll open it up for discussion if there's any discussion points or questions from the council. So, where are we? Just as a refresher, this report was directed by the Economic Development Corporation in 2002, a resolution sponsored by Councilmember Iyer, and asked us to examine our economic development processes to see where they can be improved. This coincided with work that was really already underway on the staff side to implement EnerGov, our online permitting software that we've been implementing all across the organization, but have been working recently on implementing for economic development permits. And that process really forced staff to confront a lot of issues about our land development process and whether we could be doing better. So with these efforts combined, we engaged a fairly comprehensive review of our land development processes, including 3 external reports, one prepared by Ann Arbor Spark that's a look at best practices from peer communities, one prepared by Carlisle Wortman that's a kind of a deeper dive on economic development powers and opportunities that exist for municipalities in the state of Michigan, and then a third report that was prepared by our public engagement unit, whose purpose was to engage with stakeholders who do business with the city and hear from them what their concerns are and what their recommendations are. And all of that fed into the main report drafted by the Administrator's Office, which is a synthesis of recommendations for how the city can improve our land development functions. So as I said, council was briefed December 11th, 2023. Final report was released December 18th. I've had, thank you all for setting some time aside and meeting with me and talking to me about the report. And I think our plan is to, working with Councilmember Iyer and other members of council, bring forward a small number of resolutions in March that will kind of be a reaction to the report and hopefully provide feedback back to staff on how we can move forward with this work. So I have been told that the report is a little lengthy, and I was racking my brain on how I can quantify what it says in as simple of terms possible. And the simplest way to quantify the report is legalize housing. You know, when a lot of people hear this term, what they think about is zoning, and that's a really, really important part of the housing development discussion. But it's so much more than just zoning, right? If you have a really forward-thinking zoning code, but the process that your organization undergoes to approve land development is arcane and lengthy and expensive and difficult to navigate, that zoning code is never going to be realized. And so when we think about legalizing housing, I also want to think about that regulatory side and the process side. And that's really what we tried to focus on in the report. And I want to talk about the 4 main values that we are recommending that the city set as its strategic priority for land development. The city's never really had a very strong ethos when it comes to land development. There hasn't been clear direction from the council that lasts over time on how the staff should be prioritizing projects and how we should be structuring our economic development processes and practices. And so our recommendation, our most important recommendation, is to provide that value and that strategic orientation. And the first thing that we want to talk about is support for housing development at all income levels. And that's an important caveat, housing development at all income levels. 6 years ago, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority did a needs assessment in the state of Michigan to determine how communities were meeting the demand for housing. And the results across the state were somewhat harrowing, but in Ann Arbor in particular, what MSHDA found was that we have a deficit of housing at nearly all income levels. At nearly all income levels. Over the last 6 years, that situation has not gotten better. Housing prices are at an all-time high, having quadrupled for townhomes and condos since 2011, and nearly tripled for single-family homes. The number of units listed for sale every month continues to trend down to historic lows, and the housing affordability index is at an all-time low, and that is the number of homes affordable to medium-income buyers. It is at an all-time low. So what do we do about it? Economists and social scientists have been studying this question, and there are some pretty clear answers. In 2019, the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies at UCLA released a report that provided a literature review of economic and social science studies of this problem. It's called The Effect of Market Rate Development on Neighborhood Rents. And what a literature review is, for those of you who don't know, is it is literally a review of all of the recent literature on a topic. And the point of it is to summarize, what does the science say? What are the findings showing us? And what the findings showed us in this lit review is prices for housing, as it turns out, are a classic supply and demand problem. A classic supply and demand problem. Among their major findings, they found that new market rate development does not come at the expense of affordable housing. It actually helps to promote it. With more housing units across the income spectrum, prices stabilize and more people are able to afford housing without subsidy. In addition, because prices stabilize, the dollars that governments have to subsidize housing go farther. Perhaps the most interesting part of this research is the detailed discussion on migration chains and how they are affected by new housing development. As new housing comes online at market rate or even at above market rate prices, it causes cascading vacancies down the economic scale as home buyers vacate existing homes and existing properties and move into marginally more expensive properties. This cascading vacancy causes competition for housing, and it causes prices to stabilize. Researchers at the Upjohn Institute showed that in communities with robust housing development, The addition of 100 new market rate units causes 70 below market rate housing units to become available and 40 units to become available in a community's lowest income neighborhoods. The effects of these migration chains are more robust when there is a greater supply of housing across the income spectrum. So communities that are developing property to serve all income levels create stronger and more impactful migration chains, thereby having a greater effect on stabilizing housing prices overall. So what does this mean for Ann Arbor? The city's housing policy recently, up to this point, has been focused on investing dollars in subsidizing affordable housing directly. That's a good strategy. All income levels also means subsidizing affordable housing as much as is feasible. But if that's all we do, we aren't going to make the progress we need to make on stabilizing housing prices. And so that's why the number one value that we're recommending to be espoused through the City Council is support for housing development at all income levels, so we can solve the affordability problem with a comprehensive solution. I also want to talk about engaging in placemaking initiatives. The placemaking is the intentional investment of resources to create quality buildings and spaces, public amenities, streetscapes, and other places that are desirable and attractive to people. We recommend that the city should be proactive about shaping important corridors to create destination spaces that attract investment. And taking this effort seriously will require an amendment to the charter, which we'll talk about later, to allow the city to transact property more easily. But to put it another way, engaging in placemaking is the city actively engaging in the creation of walkable neighborhood business districts. The TC1 rezoning effort that City Council and the Planning Commission have been undertaking is a really important effort in placemaking. We are changing zoning along these transportation corridors to make them more dense and to make them walkable and to make them more dynamic and complex neighborhood environments. But zoning alone may not be enough to jumpstart development in some of these districts. The city may be interested in pursuing purchase options or interests in real property or buying property outright, properties that have been historically difficult to redevelop for various reasons. We may be able to help bring them to market and jumpstart development in these TC1 corridors, and it's something that the city should seriously consider. In the report, I write about the Lowertown neighborhood, a great neighborhood in the city, don't get me wrong. With legacy businesses, with new businesses that are doing well, but it is a neighborhood that has suffered over time because of poor placemaking. A lot of that neighborhood is dedicated to university uses, to university-owned parking lots and garages in particular, where there once was housing. And that is not the kind of use that makes a neighborhood active and vital and makes it perpetuate over time, makes it an economically and socially sustainable place. There are also, I spent some time talking about the DTE building that's in Lowertown, a building that is very uniquely situated, one of the only parcels, I think, in the city that overlooks the river where you could have a quality retail or restaurant experience. But because of prior ownership decisions, it is owned by DTE. They intend to own it in perpetuity, and now the building will sit vacant for some time. That could be a placemaking opportunity in that neighborhood to develop a property and bring it to market in a way that will stabilize the integrity of that neighborhood business district. It's also important for us to consider protecting and expanding the tax base. We need to be much more strategic and proactive about shaping land uses in Ann Arbor in ways that better achieve our public policy goals and the goals laid out in our land use plans. In the report, I talk a lot about the Edward Brothers Malloy property, which is about a 17-acre parcel down on South State Street that more than a decade ago, the city had a purchase option to buy the property and hopefully convert it into housing. But as the Edward Brothers Malloy factory was being shut down, the university became interested in the property and gave a very aggressive offer to develop the property. It's an interesting story, and I'd encourage people to read all the details of it, but the upshot is right now, this property doesn't have any housing. It has athletic fields and a parking lot, and it's completely tax exempt. even though our South State Street corridor plan called for that parcel to be developed into housing. These are opportunities for the city to protect its tax base from tax exemption, to make sure that we are generating revenue to keep the government healthy, but more importantly, to make sure that the land uses are productive and the land uses are meeting with our long-term vision and our long-term plans. So I want to say we benefit greatly from U of M's presence in the community. Many Ann Arborites are proud, rightly, that we are home to one of the number one public research university on the planet, and of course the national champion University of Michigan football team. That takes a lot for me to say that as a Spartan, but we should be proud of it, right? U of M is absolutely a stabilizing force in this community. During rough economic times, the employment and the activity that the University of Michigan generates helps to keep this city afloat in more than one way. But the benefits run both ways too. One of the reasons why the University of Michigan is such a desirable destination for people to work and for people to associate with is because of the quality of the community that Ann Arbor is. Right? People want to be here. People are excited to live here, to buy homes here and to work here for a time. They're excited to go to college here. And so we need to find ways to make sure that the relationship we have with the university is also mutually beneficial. We shouldn't, as a reactionary strategy, try to prevent the university's expansion, because their success and their health is our success and our health too. But the more we are able to accumulate interests in property, the more strategic interests and parcels we can own, the more opportunities we will have to work out mutually beneficial arrangements with the university to determine how these land uses should work in our city and make sure that we are propping up our tax bill values and, developing our parcels in a way that's productive to the integrity of our neighborhoods. And the last, certainly not least, is pursuing sustainability. The city's A20 plan calls for the city to significantly improve the energy efficiency of our homes, our businesses, our schools, our places of worship, our recreational sites, our government facilities. It is important to note this will only happen with new investments in property and new development. Unless existing buildings are invested in, or unless they're replaced with new buildings, they will continue to be unsustainable from an energy perspective. And so we need to find ways to improve the energy efficiency of our buildings. Maybe not every building can be carbon neutral, but every building can be improved in an important way to make important sustainability gains in the community, and we should be trying to do that. Stating that sustainability is one of our 4 priorities for development will cause developments to be more sustainable. We are already seeing that with the proposals that are coming forth to the city, and so, further branding that is very important. But we also have to be really strategic about lobbying for updates to the building code. There is a carbon neutral and certainly a much more sustainable building code that the state of Michigan has not adopted. We are not allowed to adopt it until the state of Michigan does. And so that is an effort of our lobbying activity. It's an issue that we have been paying a lot of attention to, and we're hopeful that we can achieve that. But there are other powers we need from the state as well. We have very, very limited authority to utilize tax abatements for development purposes, and we can't offer them for sustainability in buildings. That's something that we'd like to discuss with the state of Michigan. We also can't offer tax abatements for housing development. That's another thing we'd like to discuss with the state of Michigan. And so we shouldn't be giving away the farm. As I said before, protecting the taxable value of our property is also important. But the more tools we have at our disposal, the more opportunities we have to achieve our public policy goals. And so those are things that we should keep in mind. So our first and most important recommendation is that we endorse these 4 values as the North Stars of our development policy and send a message to the organization, to the community, and to developers that these are the things that we want to value as our land is developed. But there are, of course, many other recommendations as well. We've recommended that we create an economic development office led by an economic development director and staff. That person would lead these efforts within City Hall. There's a lot of ink invested in this report in talking about the bureaucracy of City Hall and the bureaucracy of the land development process, and the supervision of that process needs to fall under one person in one office, and it currently does not, which historically has led to some dropped balls and some missed communication. We need to be better about that. This person would also be a primary interface with Spark, helping to pursue business retention and expansion opportunities through Spark that right now may be slipping through our fingers and heading elsewhere in the county or elsewhere in Southeast Michigan. We do not do very much with small business support. An economic development director would be in charge of those activities as well. And of course, as I've recommended, somebody who can keep an eye out for strategic opportunities to acquire interests in real property, purchase options, land sales, things like that, so that the city has a portfolio of tools that we can use to leverage our public policy priorities as land gets developed. That would be their job as well, to look out for those opportunities. We also talk a lot about creating as much separation as is feasible between the site plan and civic plan review processes. Right now in the city, we tend to hold site plan approval until we get very deep into civic plan review, to the point where sometimes the site plans are delayed for months on end while we're working out technical engineering issues that are really only tangentially related to the site plan. In our peer communities, site plans should really be considered like a dimension and space budget for a building, right? It is not intended to be a complete engineering of the project. It is intended to be we have checked with zoning, we have done basic environmental and utility checks. This is a generally permissible project. Please move forward to the engineering phase. The reason why it's important to separate that out is for many developers, they can't get financing approved by their financial institutions until they have their entitlements done, AKA their site plan approved. And so the more of that engineering we're stuffing at the beginning of the process, the more cost we're putting in terms of cash investment on developers. And that creates an odd incentive for us that really, for the most part, only companies that are extremely well capitalized and our legacy companies can oftentimes bear the cost of developing in Ann Arbor. If we truly separated this process out and had the site plan approval much earlier in the process, we think that would encourage newer companies, smaller companies, certainly more women and minority-owned development companies to be interested in developing in Ann Arbor. We want to make public engagement better timed and more impactful for site plans. I'll get into that into the next slide. But I think that's an important improvement we can make to the process. Many citizens find our engagement in the development process to be frustrating, and we shouldn't make it frustrating. We should make it effective. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I've also spoken about fortifying staff functions, eliminating single points of failure. When I was here in December, I pointed out that, we have one real estate attorney, we have one transportation planner, we have one floodplain expert. There are multiple instances across the organization where we have one employee who's responsible for important aspects of the land development review process. When those employees are out sick, when they're on vacation, when they're burned out, the development review process slows or stops at times, and that has a cascading effect on projects. And so we need to fortify those staff functions, make sure that we don't have these single points of failure, and make sure that where we have offices that a lot of work runs through, we have an adequate amount of staffing to deal with it. The report also lists a series of technical changes to city ordinance that would eliminate minor regulatory hurdles. I won't go through all of them here, but there are things like how we handle land divisions is rather bureaucratic, and it doesn't need to be under state law. There are how we deal with selling paper streets in the city is also a very long, drawn-out, overwrought process. And these aren't real streets. These are streets that were planned but were never developed. Just a lot of little processes like that can snag developments up and just add months to the approval process that we're recommending clean up. And then, of course, there's the amendment to city charter, which I'll get to in a minute. So I just want to talk, there are a couple issues here that in discussing this with members of the community and with members of council, we've gotten some really good feedback and interest on these two issues, and I just wanted to call them out briefly here and kind of reflect some of that feedback back to the council, because it may not be entirely captured in the original report. Like I said a few minutes ago, we want to make public engagement more meaningful. Our public engagement is often exhaustive and redundant, which can bias decision-making toward the status quo. And
Ma'am, please be quiet.
it can bias decision-making toward the status quo and make it very frustrating for community members. And we also tend to ask the wrong questions at the wrong times during the engagement process, which means public feedback is often unproductive. Right now, our feedback has a lot of engagement very early in the process, even before a site plan is submitted, and then some engagement very, very end of the process when it's unlikely that any changes could actually be made. What we're proposing is improvements to the citizen participation process. This is the city ordinance that requires developers to hold their own meeting right now before site plan submittal. What we're proposing is to line that meeting up with site plan submittal so that it's timed to when staff are actually working on and reviewing a project, and those comments don't get lost in the process. And we also think we may be better served by expanding the notification for the citizen participation process. Right now, we're required to send a physical postcard in the mail to people within a certain radius of where the development is. But as we all know, interest in development is a citywide issue. So why can't we be doing some digital notification, a city calendar, hit our planning commission subscription list, and let a wider swath of the city give comment on these projects when we are actually reviewing them and working on them? I think that will make our site plan process and the engagement related to it much more effective, much less frustrating for the public, and much more focused when the actual valuable work is happening on site plans, rather than kind of hiding it at the very, very beginning or pushing it off until the very end. I also want to talk about the charter amendment. There is one section in particular in the charter, section 14.3A, which requires that all transactions for interests in real property come before the council and receive 8 votes, regardless of the dollar value. So what this means is every lease agreement the city enters into, even the $1 a year lease agreement we used to enter into with the university to run the dental clinic, comes before the council and requires 8 votes. Purchase options on property. Now, these are not actual purchases of property, these are purchase options. They say that the city has the right of first refusal should the property owner decide to sell at some point. All purchase options come back to the city council in our 8 vote items. Of course, land sales and acquisitions come back to the council, we know that. Development agreements, which are essentially bureaucratic documents that are associated with site plans that are contracts with the developers, those all come to the city council, even if the site plan is approved elsewhere in the process. So a site plan can be approved by planning commission on a majority vote, but the corresponding development agreement comes up to city council and it's an 8 vote item. Easements that the city is involved with also are 8 vote items that come up to the council. The intent of the language is pretty clear. It is to discourage the city from engaging in efforts to alter or change or improve property in the city, no matter how small the agreement or the effort might be. So I just want to say we can't really take seriously a commitment to get housing prices under control or to develop the TC1 districts or anything like that, as long as this provision of the charter is still in effect. We need more flexibility to engage in the acquisition and the dispossession of property. So what we're recommending is the section should be repealed and replaced with language stipulating that a development agreement will be approved through the same process that its corresponding site plan is approved. So what would that look like and what does that mean for the council? Our standard contracting threshold would go into effect, the $75,000. Now, you may be saying to yourself, John, there is no property in the city you can buy for less than $75,000. That is correct. Pretty much all land sales will still come to the council. But things that wouldn't come to the council necessarily Certainly, development agreements, like I said, would be approved in the same process that their corresponding site plan is approved. Purchase options on property. If the city is interested in accumulating purchase options, and this is part of a process called site assembly, right? If you need a couple parcels right next to each other to build a facility or to help aid in a housing development, maybe there's an affordable housing development we're interested in, maybe there's a developer who says, we want help accumulating property so we can build this thing that's allowed by right in your zoning code. It's good to try to accumulate those options with some discretion, because if it's very clearly publicly known that you're trying to accumulate those purchase options, that last purchase option is going to be the most expensive thing the city has ever bought, right? And so if you have 2 or 3 parcels that you want to aid in affordable housing development, it's good to try to do that with some discretion. And then when the city wanted to actually execute the purchase, all of those agreements come to the city council and are vetted publicly, and then we can make a decision, the city council as a body and the city together through a discussion about whether we actually want to engage in that purchase or not. So it's important to have this flexibility and this ability in the city to do the things that we're recommending in this report. And the last, I think this is the last slide, and then we can have some discussion if you're interested, is, like I said, the resolutions for council. We think there will be multiple resolutions that will come forward to council in March. The resolutions, we hope, will provide clear and durable strategic direction for the city to engage in land development activity proactively. They will provide endorsement for the initiatives as outlined in the Economic Development Report and as the council is interested in endorsing them. And what I will say, I've gotten some questions from the council, you know, this is a big steak, right? And we're going to have to eat it one bite at a time. So how do we prioritize this? When should we expect this work to come back to council? And what I will tell you is it will take time to implement these recommendations. It will guide our work, at least for the coming year, probably for longer. And as ordinance changes or budget proposals or legislative initiatives come forward, we will bring them to the council when they're ready. So it will be an iterative process. It is not the kind of thing where we're going to be able to flip a light switch and bingo bango, we're in the real estate business, right? So it will take time. It will take time to get this process going. So with all that being said, I took half as much time as I did in December, so if there are comments or questions from the council, I'm happy to discuss.
Councilor Song.
I actually have a T-shirt that says legalize housing that I bought 3 years ago. So my question, I have so many questions, but my first is how do you envision us coordinating this work with the county, with OECD, so I guess there's a second part of that question, which is, are there discussions with other municipalities in the county and how we anticipate legalizing housing? So it's more of a, not only Ann Arbor, development and housing kind of goes hand in hand throughout the county.
Sure. At this point, not detailed discussions. I think, there's some comprehensive recommendations here, but I know it's important for Milton and I both to make sure that we get direction from the council before we really start moving forward and turning over rocks and having conversations. We have had some conversation with the county. They're in the process of finalizing their facilities plan, which, will help. It's helping them revision what they're doing with the properties that they own, including properties in the downtown, parking lots, underutilized buildings, things like that. I envision some partnership there, if they're interested. It's a two-way street. And of course, we have existing strong partnerships with the Housing Commission, with Avalon Housing, with other affordable housing operators, providers, and I envision that those relationships will strengthen from this report. At this point, though, I think outside of that, we're in the ideating stage, to borrow a buzzword. So.
Councilor Rackman.
Thank you. I was looking back at the the document that was the stakeholder engagement that I think fed this recommendation. And one thing that stood out is there were several things that were related to efficiency. It seems to me buckets were like efficiency, culture and responsiveness, customer service, and sort of like tending to follow the letter instead of the spirit of the law. And so I'm just curious, it seems like there might be some lower hanging fruit in terms of like how do we do things faster so that they're more efficient and can be accomplished more quickly. And I'm wondering what of your recommendations kind of address that or get at that.
So I think that there is a customer service approach with the city that can be augmented a little bit. Our public services team in particular does an exceptional job. They get into the details on developments. They are, I think they view part of their role as being watchdogs over the public infrastructure and even more importantly, the privately owned infrastructure that we interact with. And that's critically important, and we should not lose that ethos at all. But there are times when I think our notes back to developers could maybe be a little more detailed in terms of what the city is looking for. I think there are times when we need to be a little more flexible in being responsive to developer asks. And there are some examples written into the report where I think we go into some detail on that. But I think I wouldn't necessarily call that a low-hanging fruit, but I think that is a really important thing that we will want to work on and emphasize across the organization. An economic development director is an important part of that, right? Part of the frustration developers have is they want to enter into these processes kind of sideways and interrupt them to an extent and reprioritize projects so they're getting the answers that they need in a timely manner. But when that happens, from the perspective of the city, that is a reprioritization. That means that the next person's permit who's up isn't being worked on because somebody walked into City Hall and knocked on your door, right? And so I want to defend the integrity of the work that we do in that respect, in that it's important for us to prioritize this stuff on, whoever's next in line is getting our attention. But I do think that we can be a little more productive in terms of our feedback to developers, acknowledging emails or phone calls in a timely manner when they come in the door, things like that. Part of that is a staffing problem. I do go into detail in the report discussing some of the staffing challenges that we have in the city. There's a chart in the report that shows the permit activity we have for development-related permits. Both the number of permits and the dollar value of permits has doubled over the last decade. But we have the same number of staff working on it. And so, that's a situation that leads to burnout. That's a situation that leads to people simply not being able to respond to an email in a timely manner. So while I think it's important for us to set those expectations for staff, we also have to follow up with resources and support so that they're in an environment where they can succeed.
Councilmember Dish.
Thank you. And thank you again for the enormous amount of work that this report reflects. I think that you detailed this fairly well, but I wanted to go back to the point about citizen participation. And so, as people know, if they follow the Planning Commission closely, the citizen participation process that we have involves a postcard to the immediate neighborhood and a meeting hosted by the developer, as you say, not aligned with the site plan review. So I think aligning the citizen participation process with the site plan review is a great idea. And then my understanding, and we talked about it, is that you propose to have an electronic version of this postcard in addition to the one that is mailed out to the immediate neighbors, and email it to the planning listserv, as well as posting it on the city website. I think both of those are good measures. I think they clearly expand what the citizen participation process is. And because it goes out to the planning listserv, it's not that far removed from notification of a public hearing. It's just not yet a public hearing at Planning Commission, which isn't as effective because it comes at the end. Is there anything we can do to to get people's attention? I mean, people know there's a rhythm to Planning Commission meetings. There are also, there's a rhythm to those meetings. There's not necessarily a rhythm to the processes that we're talking about right now. Is there anything else we can do to reach out even more?
Well, I think that's worth discussing. I'd want to get feedback from planning staff before we kind of went really down into that rabbit hole. But, Councilmember Dish, an issue that you and I talked about was that there are a lot of people who, if you're not within that radius of that project, your first notification that there's a development coming that you may be interested in is actually the Planning Commission agenda. And it's really very, very late in the process. And so, that I think contributes to people's frustration. And so if we move the onus of the public engagement away from the Planning Commission meeting and when that site plan submittal is happening and kind of make that the focal point of engagement, I think we will be in a situation where people are more satisfied because they're being more timely notified and they're giving comments, when it can be more effective. What that looks like, I think we've got a lot of discussion to figure that out.
One more tiny follow-up. The other component of the public hearing that is beneficial, the current public hearing, even though it's too late, is that members of the Planning Commission are there. Members of the Planning Commission do not usually attend these citizen participation meetings. They often conflict with Planning Commission meetings or other city meetings. And I don't think that it would be reasonable to expect every member of Planning Commission to attend those, but I think we might need a culture shift around having the ward reps attend those, and maybe as, some planning commissioners. And that would really mean that the developers would need to coordinate because many of us just don't have very much flexibility in our evenings and we need more lead time if we should keep the 1 or 2 nights open. The 1 or 2 nights that are free often fill up, very far in advance. And so I think that it would be beneficial to have representation of officials elected and otherwise appointed at those meetings. And so I hope that we can work on coordination in order to make that possible.
Councilmember Iyer.
Thank you. I echo the gratitude that others have expressed about the enormous amount of work here. And just generally speaking, I'm so excited because this is, I think, one of the biggest things that City Council and staff have done or will be undertaking in terms of housing and affordable housing affordability in our community in my memory, really. Couple of questions I wanted to follow up on with the customer service aspect of it. So, and this is, I feel like it's getting into the weeds and the recommendations that you've given for us and the things that we need to undertake as a council are very high level policy, et cetera, which is, and some of the recommendations or the potential solutions in your stakeholder engagement report are more on the management level. So I was just curious whether you might be pursuing some of these, and it's not in the report to us because that's not our purview, particularly with regard to customer service, things like project management software, partner system to keep staff accountable to each other, in-person office hours potentially for developers to come in and get their questions answered. Are those things that are being considered and it's just not part of our purview, so we're not hearing it?
The answer to that is yes. I think that the person in the organization who will be responsible for driving that on a day-to-day basis will be the economic development director. And so, we want to have that position budgeted and hired, and part of their portfolio will be owning that customer service interaction throughout the organization. So, we view those things kind of as our, the administrator's side personnel initiatives. But yes, very much so. They're on our radar, and we're very interested.
Thank you.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thank you. Again, this is a great report and a great roadmap for our city in terms of making sure that we're actually building the housing that we all want to see. So just to follow up a little bit more on that last point, obviously it's going to take, if we move forward the recommendation of building out an economic development office, it would take some time to get that into place, get the appropriate person hired and get them up to speed in the organization. I'm assuming there are some of these pieces related to customer service that we would want to see implemented a lot sooner than that. So I just want to reiterate that point, that I think that's an urgency for our organization, that folks should be able to reach out to the city and get a response within a sort of a reasonable amount of time. And certainly the recommendations from the Spark report and peer communities talk about, relying on different types of technologies that help to assist when, I assume, when staffing is short. And that kind of leads me to a question around, there are a lot of great recommendations in this report, and then there's also the appendices where there are some recommendations that are maybe not explicitly built into the recommendations that you put forward in this report, whether it be from the Spark or the community engagement. If there are elements there that we have questions around, should we just be reaching out to you in terms of seeing if those are integrated into a recommendation, or if that's something that, how would you like to see questions brought back to you?
There are a lot of recommendations in the 3 consultant reports that are very good, but that, in my estimation, I thought we need some infrastructure set up here before we can take a serious run at these. And so they may not be the top, recognizing that it's already a 90-page report, it may not be the top things I would emphasize right now. But they are, I think I write this in the report, that they are a treasure trove of good ideas. And I think that they are a well that we will be going back to often. As we knock one of these recommendations out and make a big step forward, we're going to go back to them and see what's next up.
Okay, thanks. And then one of the other big recommendation in here is, of course, the charter amendment,
Yes.
which makes, there's a lot of sense to those recommendations, particularly in terms of the land acquisition side of things. But if you could speak a little bit more towards the sale and leasing, and kind of why you see that as an important changing that threshold. I can think of a recent property that we've sold for $1 to the Housing Commission. So that would have been under the $75,000 threshold. But then, of course, we've had other recent discussions as well. And so thinking about, if you could talk a little bit, just kind of separating out the acquisition versus the sale and leasing, and how that might be of benefit.
Sure. I think that the ethos that I would want the city to reflect is that it should just generally be easier to do these things. And that doesn't mean that they should happen without oversight. It doesn't mean they should happen without discussion. A transaction of any of these types under $75,000 is going to be a pretty minor transaction, right? But it's the accumulation of them over time that can help the city build up a portfolio that allows us to have leverage, right? And so as it is now, with all of these things going to council and requiring a supermajority vote, it lowers interest from outside parties. It ties up a lot of resources in the attorney's office and the city administrator's office. It adds a lot of time, which can make deals fall apart, even simple deals fall apart. And so, what I would say is that by making the process generally easier, we can add a lot more value. Even in if on a one-on-one basis, you might say, well, we lost that transaction, but that's okay because we have these others, or something like that. Over time, that adds up, and it really handcuffs our ability to affect property development over the course of history, over the broad sweep of the future of the city.
Thanks.
Councilmember Dish.
I wanted to bring up the Design Review Board. And I think it makes a lot of sense to dissolve it, especially because in staff's opinion, the Design Review Board doesn't actually have any ability to compel. And often staff achieves as much as can be achieved with or without the Design Review Board's impact, or input, excuse me. So it makes sense to me because it doesn't sound like it takes a lot of time, but has little impact. So we'd rather see that reversed, like less time, more impact. So I wonder if it's possible to get some recommendations from staff as to how they will, just some specific recommendations, as to how they will incorporate the best pieces of design review into site plan review and other parts of the process that are already happening in the organization. Because it would be very helpful, because one of the biggest concerns that we hear, and I think we heard this raised when, well, actually, never mind, sorry. One of the biggest concerns that we're hearing is that people feel that a lot of the new buildings that we have just aren't that nice looking. And I think if we're going to say we're going to remove the Design Review Board, they will see that as a step away from where we need to be going. And so we need to have something ready to hand to say to them, but we're going to do that better, and we're going to give it teeth in the following 3 ways. It doesn't have to be extensive, but it would be really helpful to have that articulated.
Sure. I think what our proposal is to make, it's important to separate the design review guidelines from the design review board, right? The design review guidelines will still very much exist and will still be a part of the planning review process. What we would like to do is make that a part of the formal planner review, so that the planners are evaluating these projects based on the design review guidelines and then providing formal written feedback back to developers through that process. We think that by having the professional planners consolidate that feedback, it will be more consistent and more direct and maybe a little more effective at getting some concessions or compliance from developers. Sometimes the design review board's comments can be conflicting. Sometimes they can wander from the design review guidelines in ways that are not particularly productive for our planning process. And so, we think that by having professional planners do that portion of the review, we can maybe be a little more effective at it.
Councilmember Song.
So can we talk a little bit about financing? For what I'm looking at this ancient article from 2010 by Ryan Stanton on the possibility of Washtenaw becoming a TIF levying corridor, so with a corridor improvement authority. And I haven't heard that discussion come back where we can think about expanding upon what we've done downtown with the DDA, right? Or talk about how we can levy bonds, these corridor improvement authorities, especially as we, do Plymouth Road and Washtenaw for TC1. How do we think about bonding, financing, in light of how this has been, a 14-year discussion about this possibility before we've rezoned? And then how that aligns with some of the things that are going on in the state and federally, right? I think there's conversation in Congress about extending the LIHTC tax credits from, I think we're at 2018, that level of the LIHTC credits being extended permanently. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for us, and what can that mean for our partnerships in developing what we need to develop?
Well, I think great question. There's a lot of components to it, so let me try to knock them out one at a time. On Washtenaw Avenue, there's a challenge with that vision because that is a state-owned trunk line. MDOT has, I think, a different philosophical orientation than local transportation officials do, which, we're more pedestrian-focused, we're more safety-focused for people who are, within the right-of-way and multimodal capacities. MDOT is really not. It's about vehicle throughput as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that presents a challenge for the Reimagining Washtenaw initiative. Maybe not an insurmountable challenge, but it's certainly a challenge. So, then the question turns to our TIFing authorities under the state. We have very limited TIFing authorities, that's tax increment financing. A corridor improvement district is envisioned and designed to be like a second DDA, but the taxing powers are very limited. A corridor improvement district can only TIF city property tax. If we want to capture all taxing bodies, the only way to do that is through a brownfield TIF, which you can only get if there is a environmental contamination that needs to be remediated, or the state law did recently change if you make a threshold of commitment to affordable housing. But the developer needs to be directly subsidizing the affordable housing, right? That recent change by the legislature and by Governor Whitmer is a sea change in the state of Michigan, where municipalities, compared to our peer cities in other states, have almost no tools for local development financing. I worked in Pittsburgh for a number of years in the mayor's office in Pittsburgh, and it was like we had like a Swiss Army knife on each finger for the stuff that we could do, right? Here, we don't have that in Michigan, and so it will take changes in state law and really a culture shift, I think, among our state policymakers to understand the importance of those development tools to promote housing and multimodal uses and transit-oriented development and walkability and the whole 9 yards. So I think that's really important. On the LIHTC question, I think you may be skirting a little bit outside of my expertise, so I'll pick that one up at a later time. But I know the extension of LIHTC was certainly important for us. So, but we just generally need more tools. When I was working I was the deputy chief of staff to the mayor when I was working in Pittsburgh, and I'm from Michigan originally, and I would always get questions from my friends in Michigan who worked in state government or city government, and they'd say, well, how is it that Pittsburgh revitalized itself so well after the collapse of the steel industry, but so many cities, especially in Michigan, have had such a difficult time doing it? And there are a lot of important answers to that. Pittsburgh has a legacy philanthropic community that really led the charge, right, for creating placemaking opportunities in the city, the city's cultural district, major public works projects in the downtown, revitalizing the waterfront, which was exclusively steel mills for decades, now is one of the most beautiful waterfronts in the country, right? That was important, but the development tools that municipalities in Pennsylvania have at their disposal are advanced and very effective. And we have almost none of them. So that is an important part of the story too, and it's an important part of the story that we need to be telling in Lansing so that people get real nuts and bolts answers to that question and not just think pieces in the New York Times comparing Pittsburgh to Detroit, because that's not helpful, right?
Further discussion? I just got like to, Mr. Fournier, Mr. Dohoney, thank you very much for this. There is a lot to like. We, of course, have a great city. We know we have artificially constrained housing supply for quite some time now. And I think we see both here in our hometown and elsewhere throughout the country a recognition that creates a housing market that's out of whack. It creates a housing market where affordability is a real problem, where inclusiveness is a real problem, and we're doing everything we can here to counteract that legacy. And one of those efforts is exemplified in this document. And so, thanks to you and y'all.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make one point that goes to the question that Councilmember Briggs raised. The customer service issue is broader than development. That's just one segment. We have customer service challenges in other parts of the government that have nothing to do with development. And so for us to improve there, that's where staff training comes in. That's where having a customer service philosophy comes in. Those things we are working on. It's separate from what John's talking to you about. We also have an internal challenge with customer service with each other. Everybody's busy. So John works on the 5th floor and I'm on the 3rd floor. John sends me an email, he sends a text, he sends a memo. But because I know John and I'm busy, I might not get back to him because I'm doing other things. So we're trying to address the internal relationship between coworkers at the same time. It all fits together, but I didn't want you to leave or have the public think that customer service is only going to be focused on people doing business as it relates to development, because that would be inaccurate. Thank you.
Thank you. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed in advance. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk or the time clock will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment?
Yes. Oh, you've started the clock? My name is Blaine Coleman, and I'm here to urge the City Council of Ann Arbor to approve a resolution against military aid to Israel, against military aid to Israel. As you know, Israel has killed about has killed and injured and buried under rubble about 100,000 Palestinian people in Gaza, mostly children and women. With your tax money, with your military support. And it's time for Ann Arbor City Council to join the Minneapolis City Council, which has approved a resolution against military aid to Israel. It's time for Ann Arbor City Council to join the Richmond, California City Council, which has approved a resolution against military aid to Israel. It's time. I remember the Vietnam War, when the United States was busy killing millions of people in Vietnam. And public life in America, to a large extent, went on very normally. Like this. I'm sure city council meetings started out the same way as they do here, with a whole lot of laughing and jolly repartee between city council members. But the United States was killing millions of Vietnamese people. Now, in the United States, you see the same phenomenon. A whole lot of jolly, regular-looking public life, including by Ann Arbor City Council members, while their government, the U.S. government, is busy doing everything it can to supply Israel with 2-ton bombs to kill Palestinians, while the U.S. government, currently led by the Democratic Party, is murdering as many Palestinians as it possibly can, together with Israel. Of course, this will continue when the Republicans take over. Our job as human beings is to demand at least a resolution against military aid to Israel. Minneapolis City Council did it. Richmond, California City Council did it. And by God, the Ann Arbor City Council will do the same. We'll do the same. I'm done.
Thank you.
Not too sure. Hello, Ann Arbor. You know why you have problems? I'm talking to the city council here. You know why you have problems with public engagement? Because decade after decade, this city council has sat here and talked about affordable housing, how about affordable housing? Yet in these decades, people, working people, people of low and middle income have had to leave this town, and instead of them, the wealthy, the rich have moved in. The city has become more and more segregated, and the housing has become more and more expensive. So when you talk about affordable housing and how hard you're working to make that possible, the public looks at you and laughs, because you've made sure they know that your policies benefits the developers and not the public. They know it. That's why they're not here. When you say you care about public housing and people, it's like when Israel says they care about human rights. While they are massacring people, while they are bombing people, while they're torturing people, they say they care about human rights. In Gaza, 1% of children have been murdered with your taxes, with your blessing, because you have not found it in your progressive hearts to say one thing about this genocide. You were forced by hundreds of people who came here to say bilateral ceasefire, which means nothing. You guys, you progressives, have said not one word about the destruction of Gaza, about murder of hundreds and hundreds of people. 1% of children, if they died here with the bombings of a neighboring country, it would mean 700,000 children. Let that sink in. Ms. Lin Song, giggling and laughing about how you were having a great time and watching the game, while your party, your tax dollars, murdered the children in Gaza, in Rafah. When I look at you, I only see people who work for money, for rich people, and they don't give a rat's ass about the public here or about people of Gaza. That's what I see, and that's what the world sees. You, America, your system of governance has nothing left. You have Biden and you have Trump. Think about it. Your system is crumbling, falling on itself.
Thank you.
Do something.
Thank you.
Pass a resolution, which we have been working for
you.
decades. Cut off
Thank you.
military aid to that Zionist Nazi state of Israel.
Thank you.
Shame on you. Shame
Thank you,
on
ma'am.
every one of you. It's a fucking genocide.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at Public Up? Please just come on up. Ma'am, could you please, or Mr. Coleman, could you please retrieve that sign?
I will get my own sign.
Thank you very much.
You don't have to thank me. You're a racist mayor.
Thank you.
And you don't have to thank me.
Thank you for your help.
You're a racist mayor and don't thank me.
Thank you.
It's a genocide, you shameful beast.
Ma'am?
Hi, Happy New Year, everyone. My resolution this year is more honey and less vinegar, because who wants truth if it's a hard bed? I don't actually know what I want to talk about tonight, but I know that the passion that you two bring every council meeting for as long as I can remember, and I went to school here in 2002, is profound. It's human. It's all of the things that gentrification can wipe out of a city. Intellect can wipe out of a human. I think that these are some noble things that we have set up and talked about tonight, and I did make a couple notes because I want to make sure that I do hit the main things I want to talk about. But I do wonder, as Genocide Joe is getting 95% of a write-in vote, He's not even asking the American people to vote for him, and 95% of people are showing up for him. And I'm thinking about the $1 trillion war budget, $1 trillion every year. And I'm thinking about, there is no Department of Peace. There is no Department of Creation. And I'm thinking about Ann Arbor, this gorgeous, consistently ranked best in the nation. And as someone who tries to engage all my chakras, I try to engage what it means to just be a rational person playing in the fields of science, and also someone who can be wooed by emotion, by art, by color, by nature, by a sunset, right? It's hard to intellectualize a sunset. And so I wonder if there's room to zoom out and see ourselves from space where we are irrevocably entangled, right? Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, Israel, black, white, Ohio, Michigan, and is our dogged devotion to patriotism, go blue, or whatever it is that extreme monotheism that permeates every ounce of our waking lives, or we live the binary, and anyone who promises even a glimpse of the non-binary lifestyle is someone who just walks down Ann Arbor as a white dude, just with earrings. Suddenly I'm like, or hula hooping, and so I think Lynn, Councilperson Song, you mentioned about Ann Arbor being a weird place with a sense of pride, which I think we should have that, and I just wonder, what does that mean in an embodied sense? What makes Ann Arbor weird? And as we're celebrating the 200-year anniversary of this place, starting to think about investing, we're talking about investing in public space, and making it provocative, blessed PBS, but so if you watch, why is that? I think that there is room for us to invest in an adult neutral zone, and an adult neutral zone ran by cultural ambassadors. I will follow up on this. But I just really embodied matters, y'all. Bless you all.
Thank you.
Let's just get along.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kathy Griswold. I really appreciated what Milton Dehoney said, because when John Fournier was talking about development, I was thinking, we could just replace development and housing and affordability with my favorite topic, pedestrian safety. And truly, we have process problems, and we have process problems in this city because we have cultural problems, and we've had those cultural problems for about 30 years. I remember Roger Frazier did a staff survey, and the results were so bad he never did another one. And I'm not sure we've had one since then. But anyway, some good news. Hoboken, New Jersey implemented Vision Zero, all of Vision Zero. They didn't just pick and choose, just announced the 7th year of no transportation fatalities. 7 years. That is possible for Ann Arbor if we do it right. And in looking at what they do, they don't even mention illumination. Because illumination isn't anything new or special. Illumination is something you do day after day, and you take it for granted. National Highway Transportation Safety Administration states lighting can reduce crashes up to 42% for nighttime injury pedestrian crashes at intersections. And I assume that now applies to crosswalks with RRFBs. In 2019, Central Student Government passed a resolution unanimously, and it was to improve pedestrian safety, including illumination on campus and in the near campus area. I'm going to give this to the city clerk after I speak, because I think it's important that it be reintroduced to this new council. Lastly, the King School crosswalks. What people ask me is, Kathy, is this personal? Why would they put children at risk? Because you speak too much, because you say things. I don't know. But if there's something that I need to do, stop coming, come more often, say positive things, I will do it, because this has been an issue now for a couple of years, and I've given you the evidence that this is a public walkway. These are public crosswalks. The fact that staff will not upgrade them and put the crosswalks where they belong, it's just mind-boggling. So please tell me what I can do so that staff just does what they do at most of the other crosswalks in town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings, Luis Vasquez, resident of the First Ward, live in Upper Lower Town. I would like for council, after hearing these presentations, to consider a resolution to, it's a kind of a, and you know I'm not afraid of saying put up or shut up, right? And I've asked this of council members before, to put up a resolution that would either fund a park through a millage on the library lot, or if it fails, to have it revert back to the pre-2018 language of the city charter. I'm about to retire from my job, and I'm willing to solicit petition signatures for a ballot proposal of such kind. And I would love to work with council members. I would love to work with the city administrator on crafting this kind of resolution, because that library lot, it has failed. The 2018 measure that enshrined a park or a commons in, in the city charter, it has produced nothing in 6 years. And we need that property to be rezoned, basically, okay? I would love to talk with you all about that, and I would perhaps be able to champion such a proposal, and would need your help in crafting the language for such a proposal. So thank you for your time, and this is something that we can do something about, as opposed to, some of the previous speakers. Ann Arbor is a special place. It deserves to have more development, more density. You are on the right track. We need to move forward. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Ken Garber, Second Ward. I know some of you personally, and I know that you care deeply about making Ann Arbor a more inclusive place and for trying to solve the housing crisis and the affordability crisis here. And in fact, I know that's true of all of you in this body, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate much of what's in this report towards achieving that end. That said, I oppose the proposal to eliminate the Planning Commission site plan public hearing, which is what's being proposed here, in the guise of, quote, making public engagement better timed and more impactful, end quote. Moving up the citizen participation meeting and making notice wider does not make up for eliminating the Planning Commission public hearing. Mr. Fournier said that at that stage, at that late stage, it's very unlikely that any changes can be made. And the report asks, quote, whether it is fair to invite the public to participate in an engagement that is extremely unlikely to result in any meaningful changes, end quote. I find this both false and very condescending. I speak a lot at Planning Commission on site plans and other issues, And I would have stopped doing it a long time ago if I felt I wasn't making a difference. I know other people feel the same way, probably some who are watching online and maybe making comment after me. And an enhanced citizen participation meeting doesn't make up for the ability to comment on a late-stage plan in front of the decision makers, which are the planning commissioners, not planning staff and maybe a couple of council people who attend this meeting. I commend Councilmember Dish for speaking up for our ability to speak up. I know others of you have done that in the past. The best way for us to do that would be to keep the Planning Commission site plan public hearing. We've already eliminated the chance to make public comment at city council level for so-called by right site plans when we last year altered the threshold for site plan review. Let's not take away what's really the last I consider meaningful opportunity still for the public to weigh in on development proposals. So let's keep Planning Commission site plan public hearings. It feels unreal to even be talking about this. I can hardly believe we're even at this stage, but that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in House who would like to speak at this public comment? Is there anyone online who would like to speak at public comment?
Caller with the phone number ending in 534, do you have a comment? Go ahead.
Good evening. This is Tom Stahl. Hi, this is Tom Stolber calling from Lower Town in Ann Arbor. I would like to talk about metrics. So we could implement a lot of things. It's nice to measure them, and part of the measurement to get a baseline, and part of the measurement is to evaluate how successful our programs are and if we need to make any course corrections. One of the things I've spoken about before at City Council and other bodies is for our sustainability. We have a metric in essence that we're A20, we want to hit carbon neutrality by 2030. We've got this giant spreadsheet or balance sheet or whatever you got to call it out there, and anytime we add or take away something from one side, if we're going to hit zero, we've got to figure out, well, how are we going to compensate for that? What adjustments are we going to have to make? So, for example, every development that comes to council could come with a sustainability analysis. What will this add or take away to being able to meet our A20 goals? And it's very important that we know what that number is because we got to plug it into that equation if we're going to hit zero. I'd also want to mention something else in terms of changes that while you're looking at various changes in terms of sustainability in particular. After the Lower Town approval, the planned project part of our ordinance, which we pointed out was not compliant with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, it was removed by the city, it was repealed and replaced with some other options. A flexible zoning option is in there that would permit 30% additional height in return for some sustainability or affordability specified benefits. It's all in the code. The sustainability items there should be tightened up. We should get a little bit more. Again, if we're going to hit our goals, we need to get more than what the code currently calls for. So I hope that can be looked at. Also, sustainability in terms of affordability. If we're talking about changing our regulations and trying to impact housing and making more affordable housing or making housing more affordable, however you want to phrase it, we need to know what are we talking about. The effects of whatever we want to call it, chain migration, filtering, trickle down, doesn't matter what you call it. In the end, if you've got $800,000 condos that are going to be price stabilized so they won't be $850 the next year, that isn't helping somebody at the $500,000 level or the $300,000 level or whatever. Those middle ranges are not being helped very much. Or maybe they are. Some people are claiming that maybe it would help. Well, we need to know what is the measurement of success there? How many units would it take to build if we're going to fill from the top, as our current policy is, to build at the top end of the market and hope that we get this impact at the
Time.
other parts of the market. How many units? How long will it take?
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending in 556. Press star 6 to unmute your phone. Go ahead.
Hello, Ralph McKee speaking from the Fifth Ward. I have a couple of comments. The presentation today was very intriguing, and I have skimmed, I would say, the report, and I will do a deep dive into it now that I've heard the presentation. That will help in the review of it. I have a couple of questions right out of the gate, and one of them relates to what I spoke about last week and the week before at the meeting on the SI Resort. I would urge all of you, whether you oppose the SI Resort or were in favor of it or had mixed feelings, to really look at if this report's recommendations had been in place, what difference would that have made in the process that was taken with respect to the SI Resort? And the one thing that I think identify right away is that there would have been an ability to have that continue despite the 4 public opposition votes. And so I have a concern about changing the charter as to that. Might be great. I think I would agree out the outset with the under $75,000 doesn't require council, and maybe some other limit below that it wouldn't require a supermajority, but I think taking it away for everything, it would really have to be analyzed carefully. Number 2, and that relates to the whole theme that I had at those other discussions, which is really secrecy, transparency, and trust. And I think we really need to focus on making these processes transparent and simple enough to understand for the public, and to really work on that hard and not just provide lip service to it. Number 3, it is intriguing for the possibility for the city to buy up purchase options and so on. That was one of the central pieces of my argument with respect to TC1 on Stadium, that if the city would do that as to the vacant parcels, it could really be served by adding density where nobody might disagree with it. Those opportunities would be very, very valuable and would maybe save a lot of the other businesses. On the other hand, do we really want to get into something where we, the city, are the agent of buying out the small businesses and putting up big buildings? And in that corridor in particular, I said then it was a real risk, and I still believe that.
Time.
And I would really feel sad if that was the result. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Adam Goodman, do you have a comment?
Hi, this is Adam Goodman speaking to you from the Fifth Ward. I also read this document cover to cover about a month ago when it came out, and I guess that was a little longer than a month ago. I think it's fantastic. I really look forward to seeing you implement basically all of these recommendations as quickly as we can. I wanted to speak a little bit also about the public engagement concept. It seems from reading the report that the real problem to be solved with public hearings at Planning Commission for site plans is that something called a public hearing has really arcane requirements for notice. It has to be 18 days in advance and it has to be published in like an actual printed newspaper somewhere. So this really slows the process down because that can effectively push things out a lot longer than even 18 days because you have to find somewhere to actually print this. So my suggestion would be, why not essentially keep the same kind of public comment period in place, but have it be public comment, not public hearing. And that is to say, every site plan gets its own public comment period, not just public comment at the top of the meeting. I think that's sort of a middle ground that might help with concerns from folks like Mr. Garber, while making the machinery of the city run a bit more smoothly. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I don't have any other callers on the line.
Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember. Communication from council. Lynn, you looked at me with so plaintively. Yes. Councilmember Song, my apologies.
This past weekend was Lunar New Year. In Vietnamese, it's called Tết Nguyên Đán. It's the welcoming of spring, and it's a time of remembrance and honoring our ancestors. For my family, that meant my ancestors who, for my maternal grandmother, was a woman who survived several massacres by the Japanese and lost her first two husbands. My maternal grandfather, who was tortured and electrocuted by French colonialists. My paternal grandfather, who lost a brother who was murdered by Japanese. And my father, who after the Americans left Saigon, flew with the South Vietnamese Air Force as a medevac pilot along the DMZ, and then escaped under gunfire the day Saigon fell to communists. Or from my mother, who is ethnic Vietnamese but escaped Vientiane as a communist, rounded up fellow teachers for re-education, only to be thrown into a Thai prison camp. So despite generations of conflict and massacres, I can tell my children every Tết that we've survived to celebrate yet another Tết, and that our story is not unique. In this country, we work together to fight for and preserve democracy and democratic values for all. In this city, we embrace neighbors and welcome new neighbors. At this table, I am thankful for our colleagues who know our neighbors well enough to want to embrace and welcome new neighbors. So I share this Lunar New Year story, this Tết Nguyên Đán story, as a way to refute the hate, the repeated hate, the anti-Semitism that comes to our meetings, that rejects our neighbors and rejects their humanity continuously, misstates history, misstates experiences in this city, misstates my own family's experience. We are survivors. We have a place here. We're not going anywhere. It's embarrassing. I think Ann Arbor's better than this. So I will say, every Tết we actually say, Chúc mừng năm mới. I won't say thank you like the mayor does, but I will say, Chúc mừng năm mới.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thank you, Councilmember Song, for sharing that story and that sentiment. I wanted to speak to Mr. Gerber's comments and also Mr. Goodman's comments as well. Mr. Goodman spoke exactly to what some of the conversations that are happening, at least that I've had with staff around how we might rethink that public input that happens during Planning Commission, because it is very important. Prior to serving on council, I've served on Planning Commission a couple of times. I think we all value that input that we receive and that Planning Commission receives. However, the formal nature of public hearings does require a certain amount of noticing. It's certainly quite possible for us to get that public input, but just call it public comment instead. So there's certainly, I think that is the direction that I would hope that we would be heading as a city, and I know it's the conversations that I've been hearing are the direction that staff is exploring as well.
Further communication? Councilman Ryan.
I just did want to respond to a different clarification on the SI thing. So regarding the Klein's lot and the SI proposal, the Sports Illustrated proposal, my understanding is that the caller asked about how this change would affect that. My understanding is it would not have affected that situation because of the presence of the ED. No?
I misspoke on that.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will just say this. I still feel that it wouldn't have affected it because I think that there probably was not supermajority support on council for that proposal anyway. And I think that that really speaks to the idea that, if a project has a lot of support, it's going to get, the 6 votes that it needs. But I don't want to, I just, as we head into this and we talk about the charter amendment, I think it's going to be really important to not confuse that particular project with what we're talking about and what we're trying to achieve with potential charter amendment.
Further communication? Motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Harrison Medina. Discussion? Favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.